The brush shading add-on for Blender comes with an example scene set up with material networks and textures. I'll give a walkthrough here of that scene, discussing how the brush shading nodes work in detail, as well as going over some strategies for stylized rendering for materials on characters like skin, clothing, and hair. We'll also take a look at creating materials for stylized metal and glass. Cool, so let's dive in. So I have everything set up on this so that it's just going through a principled BSDF, and I've connected in the color maps. Let me show you basically what I'm doing on the setup for that for the skin shader. A little messy, so let me make sure that we can follow this. So I've got two things going into it. Into the base color, I have my color map. That's kind of clear. And then on the emission, I have the color map going into a color correct and then going into the emission. And I have the emission strength set like really low. And let me show you kind of the purpose of that. So that is, we're doing NPR, so we don't want to use the fancy stuff like subsurface scattering because that looks too real. We want to have more of kind of a flat stylized look, but I want to have that warm glow that comes from skin. So I'm using emission sparingly here to fake subsurface scattering, the effect where skin seems to glow. But more broadly, I don't recommend using this in place of ambient lighting. The problem with this is that emission literally emits light which will show up reflected by other objects. Instead, a better approach is to use the skylight here to get the base ambient color. And ultimately, for NPR stylized rendering, you'll also want to aim to have a lot of the final pixels look happening in the comp. This is how they do things at both Sony and Fortiche. I'll make an additional video showing what that will look like using the brush shading. But the basic idea for ambient lighting would be to get the albedo texture color, the diffuse color AOV, combine that with ambient occlusion, and do color grading to get the ambient shadows looking the way you want them to look. Okay. But, and like I said, this is an exception to that because this has the purpose of getting the glow of skin. So use it cautiously and carefully. And what I'm doing here on the color correct node is I am taking the color, the base color here. So just display the base color, and what I'm doing here, I am tinting it to a more reddish color. I am lowering the gamma. That will make it higher saturation and more contrast. And then effectively when I'm putting the strength at 0.1, I'm also, by the time it gets into here, I'm lowering the gain on it. So if we put this back on and let's see, how do I do this best? Let me break the base color and set this to 0. And there, now we can kind of see what the emission is doing on this. So it's very subtle. So that's kind of the starting point. Another thing that I'm going to do is this up here, but I'm going to first convert this into a toon material. So I'm going to take my principled toon, just drag it into here and connect this here, and here, let me get a little bigger, get a little more room here. So I'll take the color and put the color into the base color. I'll take my emission and put that into the emission color. I'll set this to 0.1 and now I have more kind of classic kind of cartoon cell shading. It's very soft, but that's kind of what I want. And I can play with the specular size, but honestly, that tweaking of this, I want to first get in my maps. So I already have the map set up here for everything. And so this is something you do once, get it so you're liking how it's looking, and then you're just applying this again with the group node over and over again. So I'm just gonna keep this group node. The way that you would initially bring the group node into the scene is you just hit this and you type in group, and here I have this saved in here as the strokes, which is what I named it. So I suppose I could just, here's a new one, but it's going to be exactly the same as this one. Okay, so what I want to do is bring in the brushed shading. So I'm going to make a new one here. There we go. And I need to connect this into the brush strokes parameter, and I need to connect this into the normal of my shader. And you'll notice that you really can't see anything happening. So this is where I'm going to start playing around with things. So one thing I can do is increase the roll. You can see it's starting to have effect. Okay, so it looks kind of cool. And now I can start, but I'm basically seeing it here on this, and you can play with the flatness of the shader here. This is sort of the cutoff of where it cuts from lit to shadowed, and it's pretty flat right here. If I bring it all the way up to 1, it gets like really flat shaded. And if I pull it back, as I may want to, I get more of a spread in the diffuse across the face. Then for my specular, I think it's too sharp right now. I'm gonna, let's see here, I'm gonna lower the specular weight. Let's try 0.5. I have it set to tune spec, and that's a toggle between the tune spec and the regular microfacet GGX spec. And you can, see when you toggle it on and off how it affects the other sliders. So you see here that specular size is disabled when this is off, but specular roughness is on either way. So when it's enabled, the specular size affects the size, and the specular roughness controls the smoothness. Now that's if we're talking about, those terms are referring to a tune BSDF, and you see we have size and smoothness. And the smoothness is, according to the Blender manual, the angle over which the smooth transition from full to no reflection happens. So let's try changing the roughness a little bit. And that is, see that? Look what it's doing on the nose here in particular. So I'm going to put that back down to what it was. I believe it was at 0.3, just so we can kind of appreciate the difference. So yeah, so it's like this sharp, kind of oily highlight, and I raise it up to 0.35, and it softens it out quite a bit. Still sharp, we like that, but subtle. I could possibly raise up the weight a little bit. This is 100%, and you can play around with these things, but let's try this. Cool. And then the last thing I want to show you on this guy is that I have here this eyebrow mask. It's the mask of her eyebrows. And I'm putting this into a inversion. And what I want to do is connect this to the specular color. And I want to do that because I want to not have her eyebrows reflecting light. That's weird and unintended. So this is basically just a way to kind of remove the eyebrows from the specular calculation. All right, I'm digging that. So let's then move to doing her clothing. So I'm gonna jump in here and we've got the texture map on here. Notice that I'm putting it into the tint for the specular. So let's continue on with what we've been doing with just making a tune material, connecting that up, and connecting the color. And we'll connect, we'll just start with that and see how that looks. Okay, so this is where we get into the tinting of the specular. So, and this goes into even doing PBR rendering. A cloth material, it works a lot like hair because it's made up of threads, right, which are like hairs. And what happens there in like a hair shading model is that you have two speculars, one for the white colorless highlights and the other for the highlights of the melanin colored hair. And cloth is very similar, except for it has a lot less of the primary specular, the colorless specular, and a lot more. It's almost completely consisting of the secondary specular, the colored or tinted specular highlights. And so we want to do a similar thing. So I'm going to take this and put this into the specular color. And there we go. So let me just kind of play with this. So I'm going to take it like this, remove the base weight, and I'm going to specular weight is 1, roughness is 0.3. All right, let's make roughness 0.5, and let's raise up the specular size. Let's put this back up to 0.6 maybe. I think what I want to do actually is put in the brush normals map again. So a thing that actually I find works really well is once you have it sort of set up, so we have it for the skin, and you've got it so it's like looking pretty good, then this makes a nice starting point. So I'm just gonna copy this. I can actually just copy both of these and jump into here and paste these into here and then just connect it up. And I'm not seeing anything on here. So let me try raising the gain. Just double it. Okay, now I'm really seeing something. And so now I'm going to take down the roll, make this 92. strength. I think what I want to do is add in a color correct. So I'll just grab color correct into here, and I'm going to pass that. I don't really need this guy anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of him. All right, and I want to pass the color through the color correct and then go into the specular so I can kick this up a little bit. Yeah, loving it. All right, and now let me add in my base weight, and let's try 0.8. Yeah, now I can kind of play around with this, maybe take it down a little bit, balance them out. But what I really like is the ability to see a difference in the specular compared to the diffuse, and that way you're getting kind of like lots of variation on it. And I'm just thinking in terms of like how you'd paint this, right? Not so much in terms of like what the physical material would be. All right, cool. So let's, as a starting point, we'll go to here and we could take these things, copy them, and then jump into here and see if we can reuse some of that. So put that into there, and then I got to take my color map and put that into the base color, and I'm gonna go into here, copy my color correct, paste it into here, and put that into the specular color, and then put this just straight into here. Feels maybe a little bit too strong because she's like really in the rim lights here, so I don't know, 2. Yeah, I'm really liking that. So let me talk briefly about the hair. It's kind of an atypical situation because the hair is geometry, and normally, frankly, with hair, I would just have like a hair system and put a Kurohara filter on it. But in this case, we have geometry, and in the final animation, I also have like individual strands augmenting this with the geometry. So let me just walk you through what I did on this. So one aspect of the brush normals node is that you can connect a normal map to it, and then it'll give you the combined result of that. Let me kind of break off this so we can see it a little more clearly. So I'm doing that to get kind of the effect of hair strands on here by mixing the brush strokes together with the strokes from the paint. And then I also have this map here that I painted for the color. Let's see, let's turn off the weight for the specular. So we're seeing just the diffuse. And what I'm doing here with this color correct node is I'm just boosting it up a little bit just to get it to show up a little better because it's like super, super dark. And then if I turn off the diffuse and turn on the specular, Then on this, I'm just kind of like playing around with, I've got it set to microfacet GGX specular as opposed to the tune specular. You know, your mileage may vary on that. I just kind of liked what it was doing on the glancing angles here with the regular microfacet specular. And I've got the roughness set to 0.3, the weight is 0.5, the color is white, that's all pretty standard. The thing that's not really standard is that I have the IOR at 4, which is not a physically plausible value to have it at, so I'm kind of intentionally cranking it up and making it act like a metal, more or less. And kind of to find that value, I just played around. You know, if you make it like 10, then it gets like too much of like kind of this posterized looking overly lit stuff in here that I don't really like. And so tried stuff out, and this seemed like a nice value to use. And as you can see, I'm getting some pretty nice effects on here with that combination of the brush normals together with the normal map combining together on here is giving me some kind of fun cartoony looking effects for the hair. And then, you know, combine that together with the diffuse weight, and I'm pretty happy with the results. Finally, I want to show you some examples of metal and glass tune shading. For that, we'll be using the Junk Shop Blender Splash Screen by Alex Trevino, which you can download from the Blender Sample Scenes page. Here's the original PBR render, and here it is with the brushed shading. You can also add a Kuwahara filter to get a more graphic look. Awesome, let's dive in. You can see I've kind of gone in here and swapped these out with tune materials and used the brushed normals on them. So I'm getting this like really gorgeous kind of toony metal on here. And on this glass too, I'm getting some tuned glass on here. And you know, of course, on other things too. It just looks really fun to see this in that particular style. So let's give this a look. So I'm gonna come into here, and we're just gonna make this from scratch like before. So here's the tune shader, and I'll stick this into here, and then we'll put our color map, come on buddy, into here, and just go in here, and I'm going to put the metalness onto 1. Oh, I need to obviously connect the brush normals shader into it. And there you go. Looking really nice just straight out of the box. And you can of course tweak these things around here. The way that the metalness works in in my principal tune shader is it uses the diffuse color to tint the metallic using 2 lobes of the glossy tune BSDF for the reflections to get a stylistic metallic look. And here the specular size controls the specular dot, which takes its color from the specular color, whereas the specular roughness controls the overall material roughness of the metal's tinted reflections. And here I want to say that with a PBR workflow, a physically based material is either metal or it's not. There's really no such thing as like halfway in between metal. So values between 0 and 1 on the metalness are not physically plausible, but this is a not photorealistic workflow. And so it's expected to have values that are intended to achieve the artistic intent. So you may find that you like to just tweak these things around on the metalness, and I would encourage that. So cool. So that's that one. And let's jump over here and look at the glass. So I could just yank this into here with the glass, but what I'll do is I'll just make it from scratch, and then I'm going to come into the transmission weight, set that to 1. I need to connect the brushed normals map to it. So let me find that in here. There. And yeah, so we're getting that stylized glass. And again, in the case of the principal tune, the stylized glass is a mix between refraction at glancing angles and just straight on transparency. And this allows for stylized glass where indirect reflections and global illumination are disabled for NPR lighting. That is, that the max light bounce is set to 0 for the diffuse and the glossy. If you did that on like regular refractive materials, it just wouldn't work at all. You have to have the diffuse bounces and the glossy bounces on. And a lot of times in a tune workflow, you don't want to have those kind of secondary reflections happening in the scene. You don't want to have global illumination happening in the scene. And so this just gives you the options of being able to disable that functionality as desired for artistic intent. Cool. So again, I will put a link in the description for where you can get the brushed shading add-on.